My roommate has been using my towel for months. I only found out because he thanked me for always keeping it so soft. I was loading the dishwasher when Derek said it. Just casual, like he was commenting on the weather. "Hey man, I appreciate you always keeping that blue towel so soft. Whatever detergent you use is amazing." I stood there with a plate in my hand, water dripping onto the kitchen floor, my brain trying to process what he'd just said. The blue towel. My blue towel. The one that hung on the hook in my bathroom. The one I used every single morning after my shower. The one I pressed against my face. My stomach dropped so fast I thought I might actually throw up right there on our kitchen tile. I'd been living with Derek Brennan for 8 months. We'd met through a Craigslist ad when I moved to Seattle for my job at a software startup. He seemed normal enough during the apartment tour, a 29-year-old accountant with a steady job downtown, clean enough, quiet enough. The 2-bedroom in Capitol Hill was perfect, the rent was split fairly, and he didn't throw parties or leave rotting food in the sink. I thought I'd lucked out. I worked long hours, he worked long hours, and we mostly existed in parallel lives that occasionally intersected over takeout or a Netflix binge, standard roommate arrangement. Nothing weird, nothing that would make you think twice. But now I was thinking. I was thinking about every morning for the past 8 months, every time I'd stepped out of the shower and reached for that towel, every time I'd dried my face, my body, my hair. And Derek had been using it too. When? While I was at work? Before I woke up? After I left for the gym? My skin started crawling like insects were marching across every inch of me. I managed to mumble something neutral. "Oh yeah, just regular Tide." And Derek smiled and went back to his laptop like he hadn't just detonated a bomb in my brain. I finished loading the dishwasher on autopilot, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped a mug. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind racing through every interaction we'd had. Derek was always friendly, maybe a little too friendly. He'd comment on my schedule, mention he noticed when I got home late, ask about my girlfriend when she visited. I'd thought he was just being a considerate roommate. But now every memory took on a different shade. The way he'd sometimes be in the hallway when I came out of the bathroom. The time I'd found my laundry moved from the washer to the dryer, which I'd appreciated at the time. The morning I could have sworn my shampoo bottle was in a different position. I'd told myself I was being paranoid. Now I wasn't so sure. I started paying attention, really paying attention. The next morning, I marked my towel. Nothing obvious. Just a tiny pen mark on the inside of the hem where you'd never notice unless you were looking for it. I went to work like normal, came home at my usual time around 7. Derek was already there, making dinner, asking about my day. I went straight to the bathroom. The towel was damp, not soaking, but definitely damp. And the mark had shifted position. The towel clearly having been used and rehung in approximately the same spot, but not exactly. My heart started hammering. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't an accident. This was a pattern. I bought a new towel. Green this time, clearly different from the blue one. I hung the blue towel on the hook and put the green one in my closet, using it exclusively. I watched Derek's behavior like a hawk. 2 days later, he commented again. "Man, you're keeping that towel extra soft lately. I might need to steal your secret." He laughed. I laughed too, but it sounded hollow even to my own ears. He wasn't even trying to hide it anymore. Or maybe he'd never been hiding it, and I'd just been too trusting to notice. The realization made me feel stupid and violated in equal measure. What else had he been doing that I hadn't noticed? I started documenting everything. Pictures of the towel position before I left, after I got home, the subtle dampness, the way it was never quite hung back exactly right. I felt crazy, like I was overreacting to something stupid. It's just a towel, right? People share towels. But we weren't people who shared towels. We had separate bathrooms, separate everything. There was no reason for him to be in my space, using my things. And the way he kept mentioning it like he was proud of himself, like it was some kind of inside joke I wasn't getting. It felt wrong. It felt like a violation I couldn't quite articulate. Then I noticed other things. My deodorant would be facing a different direction. My toothbrush looked like it had been moved. One morning I came out of the shower and my bedroom door was open, just a crack, when I was certain I'd closed it. I started feeling like I was living in a house with a ghost, except the ghost was my roommate, and he was very much corporeal and apparently very interested in my personal hygiene items. I bought a cheap security camera on Amazon, one of those small ones marketed for pet monitoring. I set it up in my bathroom, angled toward the door and the towel hook, hidden behind some shampoo bottles on a shelf. The footage made everything worse. So much worse. Derek came into my bathroom 3 times that first day alone. Once in the morning after I left for work, where he used my towel for a full 5 minutes, drying himself thoroughly, even using it on his face and hair. Once in the afternoon, just to touch it, running his hands over the fabric. And once at night, after I'd gone to bed, where he stood there for almost 10 minutes just holding the towel, pressing it to his face, breathing into it. I watched the footage on my phone in my locked bedroom, my stomach churning, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't about convenience or confusion. This was something else entirely. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every sound in the apartment made me jump. I kept thinking about all the times I'd used that towel, not knowing. All the times I'd touched my face with hands that had held that same fabric he'd been pressing against himself. The intimacy of it, the violation, the sheer weirdness of it all. I felt dirty in a way that no shower could fix. At 3 a.m., I got up and threw the blue towel in the garbage. Not the laundry, the garbage. I wanted it gone. Then I sat on my bathroom floor and tried to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do with this information. Confronting him felt dangerous. Not physically, necessarily, but emotionally. What do you even say? Hey, I know you've been secretly using my towel and it's really creepy? He'd deny it. Or worse, he'd justify it somehow. Make me feel like I was the weird one for caring. And we had 6 months left on our lease. 6 months of living with someone who I now knew had been violating my space and my things for who knows how long. I needed a plan. I needed evidence that would hold up if this escalated, because my gut was telling me this wasn't just about a towel. People don't do what he was doing for normal reasons. I expanded the camera coverage. I set up another camera in my bedroom, hidden in a bookshelf, pointed at the door and my desk. I changed my door lock to one that required a key from both sides and kept the key on me always. I started locking my bathroom door from the outside when I left, using a small padlock I installed on a latch. Derek noticed. "Everything okay, man? I saw the locks," he asked one evening, his tone carefully neutral. "Just had some weird stuff happen, being cautious," I said, keeping it vague. His expression shifted just for a second. Something that looked like annoyance, or maybe fear, flickered across his face before the friendly mask snapped back into place. The bedroom camera caught him trying my door 3 times that first night after I installed the lock. Just testing the handle, quiet and careful. My blood ran cold watching it. Then he stood outside my door for 6 minutes, just standing there, like he was listening or thinking. I started taking my laptop to work with me instead of leaving it on my desk. I checked my drawers obsessively, looking for signs they'd been searched. I found them. My socks were in a different order. My old photographs, kept in a box in the closet, had been looked through. I could tell by the way they were stacked. Someone had been through my tax returns, my medical documents, my old college papers. Everything had been touched. I documented it all. Photos, videos, timestamps. I created a detailed log in a password-protected document stored in the cloud. I backed up the camera footage religiously. Part of me still felt insane for doing this, for treating my roommate like a criminal over bathroom habits. But another part of me, the part that had watched him stand outside my locked door in the middle of the night, knew this was necessary. My girlfriend Ashley noticed the change in me. "You seem stressed," she said during dinner at her place, where I'd been spending more and more nights. "Is work okay?" I told her everything. I showed her the videos. I watched her face go from confused to horrified to angry. "You need to report this," she said immediately. "To who?" I asked. "The police? And say what? My roommate used my towel?" Ashley shook her head. "This is stalking behavior, Leo. This is obsessive. This isn't normal roommate stuff." She pulled out her phone and started searching. 10 minutes later, she'd found a tenants' rights organization and a lawyer who specialized in housing disputes and harassment cases. Attorney Diana Frost, licensed in Washington state since 2009, with a focus on tenant protection and domestic harassment situations. Diana Frost listened to my story in her downtown office, with an expression that managed to be both sympathetic and professionally detached. She was in her mid-40s, sharp eyes behind frameless glasses, taking notes on a legal pad with practiced efficiency. I showed her the videos, the documentation, the timeline I'd created. She watched the footage of Derek in my bathroom without flinching, though I saw her jaw tighten. "This is absolutely harassment," she said finally, "and depending on what else he's been doing, this could qualify as stalking under Washington state law." RCW 9A 46.1110 defines stalking as repeated unwanted contact that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or suffer emotional distress. "But is it enough?" I asked. "For what? A restraining order?" "Probably, though we'd need to demonstrate a pattern and that you feel threatened. For breaking your lease without penalty." "Absolutely. Your landlord has an obligation to provide a habitable space free from harassment by other tenants." Diana leaned forward. "But here's what concerns me, Leo. This behavior, this level of intrusion and obsession, it typically doesn't exist in isolation. People who do this kind of thing, they escalate. Has anything else happened? Anything involving your girlfriend, your work, your car? Any vandalism or threats?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "My car got keyed last month," I said slowly. "It was parked on the street outside our building. I assumed it was random." Diana wrote that down. "What about online? Social media? Any strange friend requests or messages?" I pulled out my phone and started checking. My Instagram had 3 fake accounts following me that I'd never noticed before, all created around the same time I'd moved in with Derek. No posts, no followers, just following me. My LinkedIn had been viewed by an anonymous user 17 times in the past month. My Facebook had a friend request from someone named Dave Benson, with no mutual friends and a profile picture that looked stock photo generic. Diana took screenshots of everything. "I want you to file a police report," she said. "Not because I think they'll arrest him tomorrow, but because we need this documented officially. If this escalates, which I think it will when he realizes you're onto him, we need a paper trail. I'm also going to recommend you speak with a private investigator. Someone who can do a deeper background check on your roommate and potentially uncover if he's done this before." She handed me a business card. "Investigator Raymond Cross, former Seattle PD, 23 years experience. Tell him I sent you." I left Diana's office feeling validated and terrified in equal measure. This was real. This wasn't me overreacting. A lawyer with 16 years of experience had looked at my situation and used the word stalking. I filed a police report that afternoon at the Capitol Hill precinct. Officer Jennifer Liu took my statement, watched the videos on her computer, her expression growing more serious with each clip. "We see this kind of thing more than you'd think," she said, which somehow made it worse. "The problem is, until he makes a direct threat or physically harms you, our hands are pretty tied. But having this report on file is important. If he escalates, we have documented history." Raymond Cross looked exactly like you'd expect an ex-cop private investigator to look. Mid-50s, weathered face, sharp eyes that seemed to catalog everything about you in the first 30 seconds. His office in Pioneer Square was small and cluttered with file boxes and coffee cups. I told him the story, showed him everything. He listened without interrupting, making occasional notes. "Let me run a background check," he said finally. "Full deep dive. Criminal history, civil suits, previous addresses, social media forensics. I'll also check if there are any restraining orders or harassment complaints filed by others. Give me 3 days." I spent those 3 days barely sleeping, staying at Ashley's apartment most nights, going home only to grab clothes and check my cameras. Derek was getting bolder. The bathroom door lock I'd installed was scratched around the edges, like someone had tried to pick it. My bedroom door had similar scratches. I found a strand of hair on my pillow that wasn't mine, brown instead of my black. Derek's hair color. The thought of him in my bed, on my pillow, made me want to burn everything I owned. I stopped eating at the apartment entirely, couldn't trust that he hadn't touched my food. 3 days later, Raymond called. "You need to come to my office now." The tone in his voice made my heart race. I met him there within an hour. He had a folder open on his desk, papers spread out like evidence in a crime scene. "Derek Brennan," he began, "has a history. 3 previous addresses in the past 6 years. At each one, he had a male roommate. At each one, the roommate moved out within a year, often breaking the lease early. I tracked down 2 of them. He slid photos across the desk. The first one refused to talk on record, but off record he said Derek made him deeply uncomfortable and that he found cameras in his room that he couldn't prove were Derek's. Raymond continued. The second roommate, Kyle Patterson, was willing to talk. He pushed a notarized statement across the desk. Kyle says Derek stole his clothes, went through his personal items, followed him to work multiple times, and created fake social media profiles to monitor him. Kyle filed for a restraining order, but Derek moved out of state before the hearing, and Kyle let it drop. That was in Portland, 4 years ago. My hands were shaking as I read the statement. Kyle's description of Derek's behavior was almost identical to mine. The towel, the obsessive touching of personal items, the nighttime visits to his room. Raymond pulled out more documents, spreading them across his desk like pieces of a puzzle finally coming together. I went deeper on the financial side. Derek's been fired from 4 accounting jobs in the past decade, not just the one I mentioned. Each time there's a pattern. He gets hired, performs adequately for a few months, then something happens with a male colleague. HR complaints about boundary issues, uncomfortable attention, showing up at someone's desk too frequently. One company in San Francisco actually paid a settlement to an employee who claimed Derek was stalking him, but it was sealed with an NDA. I got that information through a contact who worked there. He tapped another file. Derek's moved 11 times in 10 years. That's unusual for someone with a stable career. It suggests he's running from situations before they catch up with him. I thought about the apartment tours I'd gone on when I first moved to Seattle, how Derek's place had been the nicest, how he'd seemed so put together. He said he'd been in that apartment for 3 years, I said slowly. He showed me photos of himself at a housewarming party there. Raymond nodded grimly. That apartment? He's been there 8 months. He moved in 2 weeks before he posted the roommate ad. The photos were from his previous place in Tacoma. He lied to make himself seem stable, established. It's all part of the performance. These guys, they're skilled at appearing normal, even charming. They have to be, or they'd never get close enough to their targets. The investigator pulled out a printed screenshot from what looked like a forum. This is where it gets really disturbing. I found posts on a certain online community, and I can't prove definitively that they're Derek's, but the details match too perfectly to be coincidence. The posts are about techniques for monitoring roommates without their knowledge, best hiding spots for cameras, how to pick simple locks, how to collect personal items without arousing suspicion. The account was created 6 years ago, and the posting pattern matches Derek's apartment moves. Every time he relocates, there's a few months of silence, then the posts start up again. New situation, new target, same methods. There's more, Raymond said, his expression grim. I ran a deep check on his professional life. Derek Brennan was fired from his last accounting job. I got this through a source, off record, but the reason was inappropriate behavior toward a male colleague. No formal charges were filed, but he was walked out same day and escorted by security. The colleague, I spoke to him, he said Derek was obsessed with him, would show up outside his apartment, leave gifts, send anonymous emails. Sound familiar? I felt like I was going to be sick. This wasn't just weird roommate stuff. This was a pattern. Derek had done this before, probably multiple times, and he'd keep doing it. What do I do? I asked, hearing the desperation in my own voice. Raymond leaned back in his chair. You build a case strong enough that he can't come near you again. You get a protection order. You break your lease with cause, and you make sure this is documented so thoroughly that if he ever comes near you again, he goes to jail. But here's the problem. He paused, choosing his words carefully. People like Derek don't stop until they're forced to stop. And when they realize they're caught, they sometimes escalate before they back down. You need to be prepared for that. I called Diana Frost immediately. Emergency meeting. She brought in another attorney from her firm, Michael Nguyen, who specialized in protection orders and stalking cases. They reviewed Raymond's findings, my documentation, the police report. This is substantial, Michael said. We can absolutely petition for an anti-harassment order. With this level of documentation and the pattern from his previous addresses, I think we have a strong case. The hearing will be scheduled within 2 weeks. Until then, I recommend you do not stay at that apartment. Do you have somewhere else to go? Michael spent the next 2 hours walking me through the legal process, explaining every step with the kind of patience that made me realize this wasn't his first stalking case. The anti-harassment order in Washington requires clear and convincing evidence that you've been harassed and that it's caused you substantial emotional distress. Harassment is defined as conduct that seriously alarms, annoys, or harasses you without legitimate purpose. We have that in spades. He pulled up forms on his laptop. We'll file the petition tomorrow morning. There will be a temporary order issued immediately if the judge finds probable cause, which based on this evidence, they absolutely will. That means Derek can't contact you at all while we wait for the full hearing. Diana added, the full hearing is where Derek can contest it, present his side. But honestly, with video evidence of him breaking into your room, stealing your property, and the testimony from previous victims, I don't see how he contests this successfully. The most important thing is that you document any violation of the temporary order, because that's immediate grounds for arrest. Some stalkers back off when they realize there are legal consequences. Others escalate. We need to be prepared for either scenario. She handed me a packet of information. This is a safety plan. Numbers for crisis hotlines, instructions for documenting harassment, what to do if he shows up somewhere you are. Read it tonight. Memorize it. I took the packet home to Ashley's apartment, hands still shaking from everything Raymond had uncovered. Ashley read through it with me, her face getting paler with each page. This is really serious, she said, which felt like an understatement. These guidelines are for people whose lives are in danger. I nodded, because that's exactly what the lawyers and the investigator were implying without saying it directly. Derek wasn't just a creepy roommate. He was someone who'd been perfecting his methods for a decade, and I was the first person to catch him with enough evidence to stop him. That made me either very lucky or very unlucky, depending on how you looked at it. I moved in with Ashley that night, taking only what I absolutely needed. I told Derek via text that I'd be staying elsewhere for a while, family emergency. He responded within seconds. Is everything okay? Do you need anything? I can watch your room for you. The message made my skin crawl. He was still pretending, still playing the concerned roommate, even though he had to know something was up. The locks, the cameras I'm sure he'd found by now, my sudden absence. He had to know. And that made him more dangerous. The cameras I'd left hidden in my locked room caught what happened next. Derek tried to break in that very night. He spent 40 minutes working on the lock with what looked like a tension wrench and pick set, and he was skilled at it. Eventually, he got it open. The footage showed him entering my room at 11:47 p.m., looking around carefully, touching everything. He went through my drawers again, even though they were mostly empty now. He lay on my bed for 20 minutes, face down in my pillow. He took clothing from my laundry hamper. I watched him stuff 2 of my shirts into his jacket. Then he found the camera. His face, when he realized he was being recorded, it was like watching a mask crack. Pure rage, followed by fear, followed by this calculated calm that was somehow worse than either. He stared directly into the camera for a full minute, and then he smiled. That smile haunts me. It wasn't friendly or sheepish or embarrassed. It was possessive and cold and knowing. Then he left, taking my shirts with him, leaving the door unlocked behind him. I forwarded the footage to Raymond and Diana immediately. This is breaking and entering, Michael said during an emergency call. This is theft. This is more than enough for criminal charges, not just a protection order. I'm forwarding this to the prosecutor's office. You need to add this to your police report immediately. I updated my police report the next morning with Officer Liu, who reviewed the new footage with a colleague. We're escalating this to Detective James Kowalski in our burglary and stalking unit, she said. This has gone beyond civil harassment into criminal territory. Detective Kowalski was a solid man in his early 50s, 31 years with Seattle PD, according to the nameplate on his desk. He reviewed everything with the kind of methodical attention that made me feel for the first time like I was being taken seriously by law enforcement. Mr. Granger, Detective Kowalski said, using my last name for the first time in this whole ordeal, which somehow made it feel more official, more real. I'm going to be direct with you. Your roommate, Derek Brennan, fits the profile of an erotomanic stalker. That's someone who becomes obsessively fixated on another person, usually someone they have regular contact with. It often involves boundary violations, theft of personal items, and progressive intrusion into the victim's life. These cases can escalate to dangerous levels if not addressed. He pulled out a file. I ran our system. Derek has no arrests, no charges, but he's been named in 3 police reports across 2 states that were never followed up on. The detective continued. Here's what's going to happen. I'm obtaining a warrant to search your apartment, specifically Derek's room and any common areas. Based on what you've shown me, I believe we'll find your stolen property, possibly property from previous victims, and potentially evidence of other crimes. I'm also going to have a conversation with Mr. Brennan. This will happen simultaneously, so he can't destroy evidence. He looked at me seriously. I need you to not go to that apartment. Not for any reason. If he realizes police are involved, if he feels cornered, his behavior could become unpredictable. Can you commit to staying away? The warrant was executed 3 days later. I wasn't there, but Raymond was, documenting everything as a witness, since some of the items were my property. What they found in Derek's room was worse than I'd imagined. My shirts, folded neatly in his closet, photographs of me, printed out, some of them from my private social media accounts that were supposed to be friends only. A journal, handwritten, detailing my daily routine with frightening accuracy. What time I left for work, what I ate for breakfast, what I wore, who I talked to on the phone. There were pages of notes about my relationship with Ashley, including her address, her work schedule, her car make and model. They found cameras, multiple cameras, SD cards with footage of me in my room, in the kitchen, in the hallway. Hours and hours of footage, some of it from before I'd even suspected anything was wrong. Footage of me sleeping, changing clothes, having private phone conversations. They found items from previous roommates too. Clothes, photos, personal items that didn't belong to Derek. They found lock-picking tools, a dozen different fake IDs with Derek's picture but different names, and a burner phone with text messages to anonymous numbers discussing following people and gathering information. Derek was arrested on scene. Multiple charges: burglary, stalking, theft, voyeurism under Washington's privacy laws. Bail was set at $50,000 at his arraignment. I attended via video conference, not wanting to be in the same room as him. I watched him on the screen standing in his orange jumpsuit as the prosecutor read out the charges. His face was blank, emotionless, like this was happening to someone else. When the judge asked if he understood the charges, he said yes in a voice so calm it made my blood run cold. Like this was just a minor inconvenience he'd sort out later. The protection order was granted immediately. 200 yards minimum distance. No contact direct or indirect. Diana Frost got me released from my lease with 0 penalty, and the landlord actually apologized, saying they'd had no idea. They'd run a standard background check, and nothing had come up. I moved everything out of that apartment in 1 day, with Ashley and my brother helping, police present to ensure Derek wasn't there. I couldn't bring myself to touch anything that had been in my room, paranoid about what he might have done to it. I donated most of it, bought everything new. The case went to trial 7 months later. Derek's defense attorney tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, unconventional behavior between roommates, invasion of privacy that didn't rise to criminal stalking. The prosecutor, attorney Laura Chen, a 15-year veteran of the King County Prosecutor's Office, decimated that argument. She presented the journal entries, the stolen items from multiple victims, the footage, the testimony from Kyle in Portland, who flew up specifically to testify about his experience. She brought in Dr. Rebecca Thornton, a forensic psychologist with 20 years of experience, who testified about erotomanic obsession and escalation patterns. The trial lasted 9 days, and every day felt like reopening the wound. The prosecution built their case methodically, piece by piece, creating a narrative that was impossible to deny. Day 1 was all about establishing the living arrangement and the initial discovery. Laura Chen walked the jury through normal roommate expectations, showed them the lease agreement, established that we had separate bathrooms and separate spaces with a clear expectation of privacy. She showed photos of the apartment layout, the distance between our rooms, the separate bathroom arrangements. This wasn't a situation where confusion could occur, she told the jury. These were 2 adults with defined, separate living spaces. Day 2 brought the video evidence. The courtroom went silent as they played the footage of Derek using my towel, the extended shots of him in my bathroom, touching my things with that careful, deliberate intimacy. You could see jurors shifting uncomfortably in their seats. One woman in the back row actually closed her eyes during the footage of Derek lying on my bed. Laura Chen let the videos play without comment, letting the images speak for themselves. When they finished, she simply said, "The defendant did this while Mr. Granger was at work, believing he would never know. This is the definition of violation." Day 3 introduced Raymond Cross and his investigation findings. Raymond presented his background check results with the clinical precision of someone who'd done this hundreds of times. He walked through Derek's employment history, the pattern of moves, the previous complaints. The defense tried to object, claiming it was prejudicial, but the judge allowed it as evidence of pattern and practice. "People don't get fired from 4 accounting jobs for being good at their work," Raymond said dryly. "They get fired because something in their behavior makes employers uncomfortable enough to terminate them despite the legal risks of wrongful termination suits." Day 4 was Kyle's testimony, and it was brutal. Kyle, now 31 and living in Denver, described his 9 months living with Derek in Portland with the kind of detail that made it clear he'd never forgotten a single moment. The gradual realization that something was wrong. Finding his clothes in Derek's room, the fake social media profiles, the discovery that Derek had keys to his bedroom that Kyle hadn't authorized. "I felt violated," Kyle said, his voice steady, but his hands gripping the witness stand. "I felt like I'd been living with someone who was studying me, collecting me, like I was some kind of project. When I confronted him, he acted like I was overreacting, like I was the weird one for being upset." The defense attorney's cross-examination of Kyle was aggressive, trying to poke holes in his memory, suggesting he was exaggerating or misremembering. "Isn't it true you and Mr. Brennan had a personal relationship that soured?" the attorney asked. Kyle looked at him with barely concealed disgust. "We were roommates. There was no personal relationship, that's the point. He created this imaginary relationship in his head where I was involved, but I wasn't. I was just trying to live my life, and he was obsessed with being part of it." The attorney backed off after that, realizing he was only making his client look worse. I testified for 3 hours, walking through the timeline, the discovery, the fear, the violation, answering questions about how it felt to know I'd been watched in my most private moments, describing the moment I'd realized that my face towel had been used by someone else for months. The jury, 8 women and 4 men ranging from their 30s to their 60s, listened with expressions ranging from disgust to sympathy. Several looked ill when the footage was played showing Derek lying on my bed, going through my things, touching my pillow to his face. The defense tried to cross-examine me aggressively, implying I'd overreacted, that I'd invaded Derek's privacy by setting up cameras. "Isn't it true that you installed surveillance equipment without your roommate's knowledge?" his attorney asked. "In my own bathroom and bedroom," I replied, "to catch someone who was violating my space." "But you didn't know that for certain when you installed them, did you?" "I knew my towel was being used. I knew my things were being moved. I knew something was wrong. The cameras proved I was right." The defense attorney didn't have a good response to that. Derek took the stand in his own defense, which his lawyer had clearly advised against based on her expression. He was calm, collected, tried to explain it all away. The towel? He'd run out once and used mine, liked the softness, and had been joking about it. The journal? Just notes for a creative writing project. The photos? He was practicing photography. The cameras? He didn't install any cameras. Those must have been from a previous tenant. It was a performance, and not a good one. Every answer was too smooth, too rehearsed. When the prosecutor asked why he had items from previous roommates in his possession, he claimed they'd been left behind and he'd forgotten to return them. 4 years later. From a different state, the jury deliberated for 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Stalking in the first degree, 2 counts of burglary, multiple counts of theft, voyeurism. The sentencing hearing was 4 weeks later. The judge, Honorable Patricia Simmons, presiding over King County Superior Court for 12 years, looked at Derek with barely concealed contempt. "Mr. Brennan, you violated the most basic expectation of safety and privacy. You targeted vulnerable people in their own homes, creating systematic campaigns of harassment and invasion. This behavior shows calculation, persistence, and a disturbing lack of empathy. She sentenced him to 4 years in state prison, with mandatory counseling and a permanent protection order upon release. Kyle testified at the sentencing hearing via video, describing how Derek's behavior had impacted his life, the therapy, the paranoia, the difficulty trusting roommates after that experience. Another victim came forward during the trial. Someone from Derek's college days who'd had a similar experience but never reported it, thinking they were overreacting. The pattern went back at least a decade. Derek had been doing this since he was 19 years old, selecting targets, escalating slowly, and moving on before consequences caught up with him. Until now. The media picked up the story. Local news ran segments about the Capitol Hill stalker case, warning about the importance of trusting your instincts about roommates and the dangers of obsessive behavior. My name was kept out of it, thankfully, but Derek's photo was everywhere. His family released a statement saying they were shocked. They'd had no idea. He seemed like such a normal person. That's what made it scarier somehow. He did seem normal. He was normal in every interaction, every conversation. The stalking existed in secret, in the hours I wasn't looking, in the spaces I thought were private. The media attention brought unexpected consequences. 3 more people came forward with similar experiences with Derek, though none had reported it at the time. One was a former co-worker from his San Francisco job, a man named Jason Reeves, who described Derek's escalating attention over 6 months, showing up at his gym, sending anonymous gifts to his desk, following him to lunch. Jason had complained to HR, which led to Derek's termination, but he'd never filed a police report because he thought it would just make things worse. "I just wanted him to go away," Jason told the reporter who interviewed him. "I never thought about the next person he'd target." Another person was a classmate from Derek's college years, someone who'd briefly been his roommate in a dorm before requesting a transfer. The details were eerily similar a decade ago, before Derek had apparently refined his methods. The college had no record of why the roommate transfer was requested, those records having been purged years ago, but the classmate remembered everything. The unwanted attention, the boundary violations, the feeling of being watched. He'd thought it was just awkward college behavior, immaturity that Derek would grow out of. Instead, Derek had just gotten better at hiding it. The third person was the most concerning, a neighbor from Derek's Tacoma apartment, a young man who lived in the unit directly above Derek's. He reported that he'd started noticing someone in his apartment when he wasn't home, small things moved, personal items that seemed like they'd been touched. He'd installed a nanny cam and caught Derek on footage, having apparently picked the lock to his apartment. But when he'd reported it to the police, Derek had moved out the next day, and the neighbor had let it drop, not wanting to deal with the legal hassle. "I thought I was being paranoid," he told the news crew. "Everyone said I was overreacting, but I wasn't. I wish I'd pushed harder, because maybe this guy would have been stopped before he hurt anyone else." The news coverage was both validating and exhausting. Everywhere I went, people recognized the story, even if they didn't know my name. Friends and colleagues who'd known about my roommate situation suddenly understood why I'd been so stressed, so withdrawn. Some people asked intrusive questions, wanting details I didn't want to share. Others offered sympathy that felt performative, like they were trying to be part of a dramatic story rather than actually caring. Ashley became protective, screening my calls, managing who knew where we were staying. The attention made me feel exposed all over again, like Derek had violated my privacy, and now the entire city was doing it too, just in a different way. Ashley and I moved in together 6 months after the trial, a new apartment in Fremont with upgraded security and cameras I controlled. It took me a long time to feel safe again, to not check my towel obsessively or lock every door twice. I went to therapy, worked through the violation, the anger, the lingering fear that Derek would somehow get out early or violate the protection order. Dr. Alan Wright, a trauma specialist who'd worked with stalking victims for 18 years, helped me process it, reminded me that what I felt was normal and valid and would get better with time. Therapy with Dr. Wright was difficult in ways I hadn't expected. I'd thought we'd focus on the violation, the fear, the anger at Derek. And we did cover those things, spending sessions unpacking the psychological impact of having your private space invaded so thoroughly. But Dr. Wright also pushed me to examine my own patterns, the ways I'd ignored red flags because I wanted to believe Derek was normal, because confrontation felt uncomfortable, because I'd been taught to be polite and not make waves. Trauma isn't just about what happened to you, he said during one session. It's about how it changed the way you see the world and yourself. We spent multiple sessions on what he called the aftermath of betrayed trust. It wasn't just that Derek had violated my space, it was that he'd done it while pretending to be my friend, someone I could trust. Every conversation we'd had, every time he'd asked about my day or offered to grab my mail or suggested we watch a movie together, it had all been fake. Or worse, it had been real for him in some twisted way, but not in any way that respected my autonomy or boundaries. Dr. Wright explained that this kind of deception, where someone maintains a false persona while secretly violating you, often causes deeper psychological damage than straightforward assault because it makes you question your ability to judge people's character. The nightmares were the worst part. I'd wake up convinced someone was in the apartment, searching through my things. I'd check the locks 3, 4, 5 times before bed. I couldn't use public restrooms without checking every stall first, convinced someone was hiding there watching. Ashley was patient, incredibly patient, but I could see the toll it took on her too. She'd wake up when I did, help me check the apartment, remind me that Derek was in prison, that we were safe. But saying it and feeling it were two different things. Dr. Wright taught me grounding techniques, ways to manage the hypervigilance and anxiety. We did exposure therapy, gradually working up to being comfortable with my own routines again, without constant checking. He helped me understand that what I was experiencing was a form of PTSD, that my brain had learned to see threat everywhere because threat had existed in a place I'd thought was safe. Your instincts are trying to protect you, he said. They're just working overtime right now because they failed you once. We need to teach them that they can relax, that you're safe now, that you caught the threat and dealt with it appropriately. 6 months into therapy, I finally told Dr. Wright about the guilt, the irrational, persistent guilt that I'd somehow caused this, that if I'd been smarter or more observant or less trusting, I could have stopped it sooner. I moved in with him, I said. I chose him. I gave him access to my life. Dr. Wright leaned forward in his chair. Leo, you did exactly what every normal person does when they need a place to live. You met someone who seemed reasonable, who passed background checks, who presented himself as stable and trustworthy. Derek's behavior isn't your fault. You're not responsible for someone else's decision to violate you. And more importantly, you ended it. You caught him. You documented everything. You protected yourself and probably protected his future victims. That's not failure. That's success under horrific circumstances. The sessions where we processed the towel itself were strangely the hardest. It seemed like such a small thing, just a towel, but it represented everything else. The intimacy of it, the daily violation, the way something as simple as drying your face after a shower had become contaminated with the knowledge that someone else had been using it, touching it, pressing it against their own body. Dr. Wright didn't minimize it. Objects become important when they're connected to our most private routines, he said. A towel isn't just fabric. It's part of how you care for yourself, how you maintain your dignity and cleanliness. Having that violated, knowing it was violated repeatedly without your knowledge, that's a profound boundary crossing. You're allowed to feel as disturbed by that as you do. The hardest part wasn't the violation itself, though that was awful enough. It was the betrayal of trust, the realization that I'd lived for 8 months with someone who I thought was normal, friendly even, while he'd been systematically invading every aspect of my private life. It was knowing that every conversation we'd had, every polite exchange, had been fake. He'd been studying me, collecting pieces of me, while pretending to be my friend. That's what broke something in me that took a long time to repair. I still think about it sometimes. Not obsessively, not constantly, but in quiet moments. When I meet someone new, when I interview potential roommates, when I see someone being a little too friendly or too interested, I'm more cautious now, more aware of boundaries and red flags. I trust my instincts when something feels off, because my instincts were right. That comment about the towel being soft, that moment of casual horror, it was my subconscious screaming that something was wrong. I just wish I'd listened sooner. Derek will be eligible for parole in 3 years. I'll be at that hearing, with Kyle and the other victim. with statements from Dr. Thornton and Detective Kowalski. We'll make sure the board knows what he did, who he is, what he's capable of. People like Derek don't stop on their own. They have to be stopped. They have to be held accountable, because somewhere out there, someone else is probably living with someone like Derek right now, noticing small things that feel wrong, talking themselves out of their concerns, thinking they're overreacting. They're not. Trust yourself. Document everything. Get out. Get help. You're not crazy. The blue towel that started all of this, I never bought another one. I use white towels now, plain and simple, the kind that show every stain and mark. I know exactly when they're clean and when they're not. I know when they've been used because I'm the only person who uses them. Ashley jokes sometimes that I'm paranoid about laundry, but she gets it. She was there through all of it. She knows that sometimes paranoia is just pattern recognition, and patterns exist for a reason. Derek sent one letter from prison, delivered through official channels to my lawyer. I didn't read it personally, Diana did, and summarized it for me. He apologized, said he was getting help, said he understood now that what he did was wrong. Diana's opinion was blunt. It's a manipulation tactic. People like him say what they think will reduce their sentence or make them look good for parole boards. I wouldn't put any stock in it. I didn't. Words are cheap. Actions are what matter. And Derek's actions spoke clearly enough for 4 years of testimony. Sometimes people ask me if I regret installing those cameras, if I wish I'd just confronted Derek directly, if I think the legal route was worth the stress and time. The answer is simple. Those cameras saved me. Maybe saved my life. Without documentation, without evidence, it would have been he said. Derek would have moved to another city, found another target, and continued the pattern. Now he's on record. Now he's convicted. Now anyone who searches his name will find the truth. That matters. That stops the pattern, at least for a while, at least for the people he would have targeted next. I don't feel victorious exactly, because there's nothing triumphant about discovering that your roommate was obsessed with you for months. But I feel resolved. I feel like justice happened, messy and slow and imperfect as the system is. I feel like I did everything right once I realized something was wrong. I documented, I reported, I followed through. I didn't let fear or embarrassment or the sheer weirdness of the situation stop me from protecting myself. And that, ultimately, is what matters most. The last time I saw Derek was at the sentencing hearing, on a screen, in his orange jumpsuit. He looked at the camera when the judge read the sentence, and for just a second, his mask slipped again. That same cold, possessive look he'd given my camera in my bedroom. That same sense that he felt entitled to me, to my space, to my life. Then it was gone, replaced by blank acceptance. He was led out of the courtroom and back to holding. I turned off my video feed and felt something release in my chest. It was over. Really, truly over. A year after the sentencing, I got a job offer in Portland. Ashley came with me, excited for the change, for starting fresh somewhere new. We found an apartment with 1 bathroom, no roommates, just us. I hung my towels on the rack and knew exactly who was using them. Simple things like that, things I'd never thought twice about before, felt significant now. Privacy isn't just a right, it's a necessity. Boundaries aren't negotiable. And when someone violates both, you don't owe them understanding or second chances. You owe yourself protection and the courage to demand it. I still have all the documentation. The videos, the photos, the journal entries, the police reports. It's all backed up in 3 different locations, encrypted and secure. Not because I think I'll need it, though Derek's parole hearing looms in a few years, but because it's proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that the violation was real, that the justice was earned. Sometimes when I doubt myself, when I wonder if I overreacted or made too big a deal of it, I look at Derek's journal entries about me. Page after page of my routine, my habits, my life, written in his careful handwriting. And I remember that I didn't overreact. I reacted exactly right. If you're reading this and something similar is happening to you, trust yourself. That feeling that something is wrong, that someone is too interested, too invasive, too present in spaces they shouldn't be, that feeling is your brain protecting you. Listen to it. Document everything. Tell someone. Get help. Don't wait for it to get worse before you act, because it will get worse. People who cross these boundaries once will cross them again. They escalate until they're stopped. Be the one who stops them, not the one who waits to see how bad it gets. Derek Brennan taught me that evil doesn't always announce itself with obvious malice. Sometimes it moves into your apartment, splits the rent fairly, and thanks you for keeping the towel soft. Sometimes it wears the mask of normalcy so well that you feel crazy for noticing the cracks. But the cracks are there. You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. And you deserve to feel safe in your own home, with your own things, knowing that your most private spaces remain private. That's not paranoia. That's basic human dignity. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. If you enjoyed this, UAUTM will definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.